Disability rights in the United States are under threat. Medicaid has faced substantial life-threatening budget cuts. Section 504 is under attack by Texas versus Becerra, the lawsuit, and most recently, the Department of Justice has decided that they will no longer enforce the Olmstead decision, which is the integration mandate of Section 504 that says that people with disabilities must receive services in the most integrated system possible so that we can receive services within our communities. And yet it feels like we as the disability community, especially on platforms like TikTok and YouTube, struggle to actually have a conversation about the things that are happening without infighting. If you're new here, hi, my name is Isa, and I am going into my third year of my PhD program in communication with a focus in disability justice. I specifically look at how people with disabilities communicate and organize together in response to the world and our systems failing us. Disability as a concept means a lot of things, and so in this video, I'm going to break down some of these concepts. Now, I want to make a note here. I'm going to be using language that is somewhat based in academic background. However, the words that I'm specifically using are strategic words that I'm choosing to use to try to communicate this message specifically to you. Please do not take this video and go, well, Isa on YouTube says this and you should be using this word for this and not that word. That's not the point of this video. The point of this video is understanding how disability shows up in our world and how it affects all of us. Let's start with the social model of disability, which separates impairment, which is the physical or mental condition of the disability, to the social condition of disability that arrives or emerges out of issues of access. For example, I'm a wheelchair user and I have mitochondrial disease. Under the social model of disability, it's not the mitochondrial disease and it's not the wheelchair itself that makes me disabled, but rather existing in a world that does not accommodate me. If I go into a space that doesn't have an accessible elevator or not an accessible entrance, those things under the social model are disabling and create the context of disability. This is the model that was used in the 1970s to advocate for disability rights, which basically said that yes, we have these impairments. However, if we're given the opportunity, we can participate in society and we should be given these opportunities. We should be given the protections. We should be given the space to be able to participate in our communities. It's important to make a note here that this version of disability is different than being on disability, which is SSI or SSDI in the United States, which are financial and medical services that are provided for individuals who cannot work. Important things to note about being on disability is that it is forced poverty. You can only have so much income. It's different based off if you're on SSI or SSDI, but you can only have so much income or assets without it affecting your supplementary income, but more importantly, affecting your health insurance. What this means is that if a disabled person tries to work and doesn't have access to health insurance while trying to make an income, that they are sacrificing their health care in order to work, which means that a lot of times people with disabilities are unable to work, not just because of their personal impairments and all of the things that are going on with their health, but also because if they do, they will not be able to care for their health. The next concept of disability that I want to talk about is that of disablement. And this is going to break down into political disablement and disablement due to violence. Now, disablement, political disablement, that's somewhat under the social model of disability. However, what I want to specifically talk about are the ways that people without impairments are made disabled by our systems. Unfortunately, the United States has a long history of determining certain people as disabled in order to strip them of their rights. According to Black Disability Politics by Sammy Schock, they talk about how specifically Black Panthers and other Black civil rights advocates were determined to have mental illnesses like schizophrenia in order to be institutionalized, forced to have certain medications, and then also experimented on. I know that post-ADA and a lot of people of my generation think of disability as something, if you are seen as disabled, it is this protective factor because we have a policy, we have a law that is an anti-discrimination policy. However, that's not been the case all the time, and it's still, even with our ADA, and then especially with the attacks on our civil rights, that the more that someone is seen as disabled, it also means that the more discrimination they could potentially face. And while we have the potential to create a lawsuit, that's not always been historically this case. And also it's potentially something that we could lose. Crutches and Spice, or Amani Barbara on TikTok, talked about this like a year ago, about how pregnant individuals may be considered disabled in order to have their rights and abilities to make decisions for themselves taken away. That disability as a status is, yes, sometimes a protective factor. However, also, when we see these attacks on our civil rights, then disability and ableism becomes a tool to further oppression of people who don't experience impairments. And this leads me to the second part of this, which is disablement due to violence, political and social violence. Because of these systems, what happens, especially when you go back to Sammy Shock's example here, is that it then created the impairment due to those circumstances. We see this in our houseless population, that individuals who experience houselessness are more likely to experience situations which create impairments. People who have marginalized identities are more likely to develop autoimmune conditions. They are more likely to experience violence, which results in disability. We have mass shootings. We have environmental disasters that are specifically the communities that are marginalized the most are the ones that are least cared for, which means that we have these multiple components that are happening. We have state-issued violence. We have the ways that individuals are being denied their maintenance and health care in ICE detention facilities. All of these things are creating a higher level impairment, but it is so connected to the political social structures. The last area that I want to talk about is disabled, or Crip, or basically the concept of disability as a social and political identity. I am someone who identifies as disabled. I think that disability and my disability is a central part of my experience. I think the political experience of disability that I have is one that shapes every aspect of my life. I try to live by Crip kind of philosophies, which is that disability provides us an opportunity as a lens to challenge our assumptions of the world, of capitalism, of how we have to function in society. I identify as a Crip scholar. I have disability pride. I don't see disability as a bad word necessarily. I think that disability is complex. I think our community is vast, and I think there's a lot of beauty in disability. With that said, even under the umbrella of identity, there's a lot of different perspectives and beliefs about disability. I recently was reading an article about how disability is perceived in Indigenous communities in Mexico, Australia, and New Zealand as a Western concept that kind of pushes in stigma, and that in these communities disability doesn't really exist because people with impairments are naturally accommodated, that it's a natural part of their community diversity. Identifying as disabled is this very complicated thing, and what happens because so much of the way that we understand disability, especially in disability studies, is predicated on this idea of identifying as disabled, that we miss out on the opportunities of seeing how people who are not white, who don't identify as disabled, have participated in disability politics, hence the concept of Black disability politics. But why does this matter overall? All of these things affect all of us. However, some of them affect some of us more than others. Last year, there was this big debate on TikTok about who's the most disabled person in the room, and then it changed into this misinterpretation of the disability hierarchy, and that's a whole video of in itself. But what happened is that it was a lot based off of personal impairments. It was about trying to compare and saying, well, this is different for me versus you and all of this stuff. It frustrated me because disability is not something that should or can truly be understood on just the basis of disability. Disability is highly intersectional. It is something that we must understand through intersectional lenses in order to actually do anything about it, in order to make sure that we are fighting for our rights, because it's not coming directly from disability hatred, and eugenics is not just a disability concept. It's deeply rooted in racism. It's deeply rooted in misogyny. It's deeply rooted in transphobia and homophobia. There are some issues that are going to affect some of us more than others. And when we're talking about centering the most marginalized, we need to be talking about who's the most affected by this specific thing and what do they know. Because it's not only about centering them and their experiences in order to honor their voice, or however it's kind of like this white saviorism idea that happens sometimes, but it's truly that these are the people who are best equipped, who have the best knowledge of how to handle these systems because they are living them every single day. One thing that COVID showed us, and it's been popping up in disability studies a lot more, is the way that impairment specifically has been disregarded, and that it was used to be more focused on, and now it's less focused on. And we're at this point where we really need to engage in the ways that our political systems affect our bodies and the ways that our bodies affect how we participate in the political systems. It is so important that we listen to one another about what is it that they're actually talking about, what are their systems that they're addressing, and how we are standing up and having cross-disability solidarity. I strongly recommend checking out the 10 Principles of Disability Justice by Sins Invalid, and one of those components is solidarity or cross-disability solidarity, that we are not just going to prioritize one type of impairment over another, that we are going to work together, centering the most marginalized, making sure that we're learning from the most marginalized, that we're going to have solidarity cross issues, that we're going to address things from an intersectional lens and make sure that we actually listen to what one another are talking about. Because there's so many components of disability, and we do such a disservice to ourselves and our community if we try to boil it down to one thing. I really hope that this video was helpful to you. If you have any questions or thoughts or things that you think that I misinterpreted, please comment down below. I would love to have an actual conversation, and I hope that this video helps us have better conversations. As a reminder, the language that I specifically use, the terms of the labels that I'm using here, it's not a map of or a dictionary that says this is the right way to talk about it. Instead, these were labels that I'm trying to use to help us understand the concepts behind them. And I hope that we can start using some critical thinking like that about this person may be talking about disability, but what is the concept behind what they're talking about to help me understand what they're trying to say. Disability rights may be under attack, but that does not mean that we have not or will not continue to fight for ourselves, our community, and one another every single day.